Hello and welcome to the latest Liverpool.com podcast from the Blood Red channel. I'm Matt Addison on hosting duties this week with Dan Morgan taking a well-deserved rest. I've got Liverpool.com's Oliver Connolly and Joel Rabinowitz alongside me, plus Reds reporter David Lynch. Guys, hopefully you're all doing okay. There's plenty for us to discuss. A Liverpool win this weekend, so we'll dive straight into it. And Joel, I'll come to you first. I think there's obviously only one place to start, isn't there? It was a late winner, an important winner for Liverpool and for Trent Alexander-Arnold. How big a goal and how big a win do you think that was for Liverpool in terms of the context of this season?
Massive, yeah. It was starting to kind of feel very familiar to the kind of recent run of dreadful results at Anfield, but not the performance. I think that was the most frustrating aspect, that really, until they conceded in the first half, the performance was generally good. They were getting into promising positions quite frequently, albeit not putting the chances away. Obviously, Salah probably should have done better with that one he had. But they were looking dangerous, they're looking sharper than they have done in a lot of these kind of quite pedestrian, predictable home games where they just struggled to break teams down. That wasn't really the case. I thought Villa were actually quite poor, giving the ball away in dangerous areas, often sort of under pressure from Liverpool. They forced that, and it was such a sucker punch, that opening goal by Watkins, because it wasn't even really a proper chance. It came out of nowhere, and the shot wasn't even a great one. One that Alisson, I think, obviously be disappointed with, goes straight under his body. And from there, you just feel like fearing the worst again, aren't you? Thinking it was just going to peter out. And they did well to kind of get the equaliser when they did. And I was saying to Ollie on our morning call this morning, it's the first time in a while where I felt, I don't think they were great after the equaliser, but I don't know what it was. Maybe it's the fact that we've had a few good results recently. I felt like there was something in it if they kept on going towards the end. And I think the two subs Klopp makes, obviously Shaqiri and Thiago, are both kind of heavily involved in that move, keeping the attack alive. And they kind of managed to pin Villa back a little bit towards the end there in that last 5-10 minutes. And yeah, the fact that it is Trent, Southgate's there watching. The position he scores it from as well is interesting, because he starts the move sort of in a central midfield position and then pops up on the left. He's there to pick it up on the edge of the box. And yeah, it was massive. I'd go as far as to say if they didn't score a winner there, I think you're probably kind of looking at top four. It kind of starts to slip away, really. They had to win that one. And yeah, it's massive now. It's all to play for, 7 games to go.
It certainly felt like a big one at the time. And there was a big chat about Trent Alexander-Arnold, specifically on the Blood Red podcast from Monday. So if you do want to go and listen to any of that, do go back and listen to that one wherever you get this podcast from. But let's focus a little bit more on the sort of wider context of it, Ollie. Joel references it there. Liverpool are in a pretty good position after that goal, at least. How do you assess things as it stands?
I think they're in a better position today than they were even going into the weekend. I think you were maybe looking before at one spot, and now you're certainly in play for 2 of them, which is just a better situation to be in. And you look at Leicester's final 3 games, which are horrific, and Liverpool have 3 pretty comfortable games against 3 teams who should probably be playing for nothing by the time they get to there. I know they've struggled against teams who sit in deep defensive shells this year. You can kind of spin it a couple of ways of, would you rather just play good teams and they're all right up for it, or would you rather play bad teams and the ones you should normally beat that they've struggled with this season? I think if those teams have nothing to play for, that makes that run in pretty great, and you kind of just then run head to head with Leicester and hope that Chelsea drops some points somewhere. I mean, you go through the numbers and they just have such a significant advantage over anyone else with their running. The average points per game of the opposition is by far the best in the league, other than Aston Villa, who, given the weekend's result, I don't think they'll still be in for top 4 shout. So they're in about as, given what a mess the season has been, and given they've got people coming back into form and back into fitness, which means Klopp has options, they are about as well positioned as they could possibly have hoped to have been even a month ago, when things felt really dour a month ago. This is probably about as well as they could hope for going into this final run.
Lynchy, obviously Leicester slipped up against West Ham. I think at some point we're going to have to accept are maybe more in this race than what any of us thought they might be a couple of weeks ago. But I suppose Leicester are the ones that maybe could, after this weekend, and as Ollie says, you look at their last 3 fixtures, Manchester United, Tottenham and Chelsea it is that they finish with. Are you almost looking at Leicester as much as Chelsea and maybe West Ham now as a team, especially given what they did last season, that could actually be caught by Liverpool?
Yeah, I think that's the massive factor, isn't it? Is that they did that last season and fell away so badly, and sort of that cost them right in the final day of the season. they shouldn't have even been involved in that shootout really with Manchester United on the last day, but poor results in the build-up to that sort of put them in that position. And I think they'll be thinking, there'll be an element of panic there that it's going to happen again. And we know at this point this season, it is so much of it's about mentality. And for Liverpool, as poor as they've been at times this season, the fact that they're in the race it seems sort of crazy, but it's also, it's a huge positive for them that in recent seasons they've not only got that winning experience, but you think back to those top 4 races that they were involved in earlier under Jurgen Klopp. They went down to the final day on a couple of occasions, so they've got real knowledge of how to get over the line and grind out results. And I think that, Leicester don't quite have that at the moment. And I think that could be a huge contributing factor. If Liverpool can just keep sneaking these results, and even if they're not playing well, and just keep that pressure on, then that should tell on the rivals at top 4. And that's a massive factor in the running. I think, as good as West Ham were the other day, by the way, and they've been really impressive recently, they're another side who would maybe not know how to deal with that pressure if it comes to it. So, Liverpool and Chelsea, the 2 more experienced teams, and teams for the winners will maybe think they've got the edge going into those final run of games.
I suppose, Joel, it's not just the fact that, if you're Leicester or you're West Ham, you're looking at potentially, particularly for Leicester, what happened last season with them falling away. It's the fact that it's Liverpool. It's, a team that strolled to a Premier League title last season. Okay, it's not quite the same players, but it's not a million miles off now. If Liverpool can get a bit of a form and just run a couple of results, not even necessarily performances together, the pressure will really be on those above them.
Yeah, I mean, it's 3 league wins in a row now for the first time since the first 3 games of the season, which just feels a bit mad, really. I think it's partly because, obviously, the Real Madrid result put a bit of a dampener on things. The fact that they didn't play for 3 weeks after the Wolves win, so it doesn't quite feel like they're in a fantastic run of form. But 9 points out of 9, if you'd said that a few weeks ago, that just felt almost like an impossibility. Ollie and I did a piece for the website where we sort of went through the final 9 games in sort of 3-game batches and sort of tried to predict where or how many points Liverpool would pick up. And I was looking at that first 3 games against Arsenal, Villa and Leeds. I think I predicted 4 points, so they've already surpassed that. But that was based on the form they were in at the time. I just thought Arsenal away has been a nasty one in recent years. Villa, obviously what we did earlier this season, and clearly a good team, dangerous players and have a good defensive record. And we've seen what Lee's done to Man City. So to already have 6 from 6 in that batch of 3 and the Wolves win is massive. If they can get the 3 points against Leeds, then it will really sort of start to open up quite nicely for them. I think as well, mentioning kind of Leicester and West Ham, it feels like Liverpool's sort of trajectory in the last few weeks has been kind of on the up. I know West Ham's results have been good, but they nearly let it go against the really poor Wolves team. They kind of held on 1-3-2. Same thing against Leicester. I'm not quite sure they'll be able to last the pace. I could be wrong. We could get to the final few weeks and they managed to get over the line. But they've also got quite a lot of kind of injury worries now. I think Antonio possibly out for the season, if I remember reading rightly. Declan Rice is out for a while as well. And I think Cresswell got injured at the weekends. He's been a big player for them this season. So that's 3 huge players, and Jesse Lingard might be able to carry them all the way. But I just refuse to believe that he's going to keep scoring at a rate of a goal every game.
He's the best player in the world
season.
now.
It's unbelievable. I mean, he just is. I've not seen a loan signing quite like it, to be honest. But I think West Ham, without those 3 that I mentioned, they've also got to play Chelsea coming up soon. They've got Everton, and there's a few other kind of that you look at on paper and think they should win, but Brighton away is not an easy game for them, I don't think. And there's another, I think they've got Burnley away as well. They do, West Ham. So, and then Leicester, obviously, they've got a kind of strange set of recent problems with the 4 players that Rodgers is obviously annoyed with because of breaching COVID regulations. So that's Maddison, Perez, and obviously Harvey Barnes is injured. I think he's due back, but they just seem in free fall. And I think that psychological factor, if we're talking about Liverpool having the kind of experience of getting over the line, I think those Leicester players, they can't not be thinking about what happened at this point last year. And it just goes to show how quickly the landscape can change. I mean, 2 weeks ago, they had 10 points above Liverpool, and that's down to 4. And it wouldn't really, I know they've got 4 very winnable fixtures coming up next, but it wouldn't massively shock you if they were to draw or maybe even lose one of them. Because as we've seen in Liverpool this season, once you do start losing games back to back, it's not as easy to get out of it as you think. So, I'm feeling more optimistic than I have done at any point this calendar year, I would say.
Yeah, lots of the teams around Liverpool, Ollie, you've got to sort of play each other. I think West Ham, Chelsea is next weekend. There's sort of lots of those games where you know at least one of those teams is going to be dropping points. And if you look at Liverpool's fixtures as well, I think it's Leeds, Newcastle, Manchester United, Southampton, West Brom, Burnley and Palace. If you look at those and compare them to the other teams, those are pretty favourable fixtures on paper.
Yeah, I think that the goal there will be, and it sounds optimistic, but to drop points in only two of them. So whether that's the Leeds and the United game, or you have a weird one away at Burnley, or home to Newcastle where St Maximin does something on the break and you have one of those performances they've had earlier in the year. But they really should target everything but that Old Trafford away, as awful as that fixture has been over the time, just given how good United have been this season, how they specifically set up in a way that would harm Liverpool. I think if they say from those run of games, we only drop points in two of them, they should feel pretty confident about getting in there. And Joel's point, the trajectory is the perfect one, because it's more about what it does to the squad and to the confidence of the coaching staff too. If you start second guessing, well, do we keep doing what we did all season in upcoming games, or well, are we just not adjusting stuff because we're worried about looking like we're panicking? You start having all these secondary doubts, and a lot of Brendan Rodgers' decisions right now are just putting out fires rather than him making decisions from a position of strength, where Jurgen Klopp can say, okay, for this game I'm playing Thiago, for the next game maybe Jordan Henderson will be back later in the season. And he seems like Jurgen Klopp at least has options now and is doing stuff from a position of strength. Same with which of the four of the front three do you pick? Whereas a lot of the other teams, including Chelsea, by the way, trying to figure out, well, is Tammy Abraham leaving? So do we play him? Do we not play him? Everyone else feels like they're putting out fires, which was exactly where Klopp has been living for 7-8 months, it seems like. And finally, it feels a bit more settled. The back four is settled. The screening midfielder is settled. And then everything from there, just options and fun and picking out match plans as and how he sees fit. So, yeah, I like I said before, I don't think they could have drawn up much of a better situation other than, just flying high at the top of the league or somewhere in the top three there. But based on where we were a month and a half ago, this is about as good as they could have hoped for as a run-in.
Just to mention on Chelsea there quickly, I know everyone's kind of focused on Leicester's last 3 games, but Chelsea's final run is not particularly pleasant at all. And they've got Brighton at home up next, but then they still got to play West Ham away, City away, and then they've got Arsenal, Leicester and Villa at the end. And again, the West Brom result, I know they got a red card in that game, but I don't think they're quite as infallible under Tuchel as people might have assumed up until recently. So I think there's definitely scope for drop points there as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely an opportunity, isn't there, Lynchy, for Liverpool? But it's kind of up to Liverpool whether or not they take it. We've kind of been here at times over the past few weeks. Even you think of good performances against Leipzig have then been maybe followed up with poor results in the Premier League. It's just a case of Liverpool almost just focusing on themselves as much as that is a cliche.
This is it. The reason they've sort of closed that gap in such a healthy position now is because they've put that run of 3 wins on the bounce together, which has just been unprecedented in this season. They've seemed to, get a couple of wins and then a defeat, or we've seen consecutive defeats, haven't we? I suppose this season, which is extremely unusual. But that's the only way you can really do anything about it in the top 4 race. You suddenly realise once you put a string of results together that your position recovers massively, and the teams around them are not massively convincing. The fact that Liverpool is close to top 4 and really in that race now, considering how bad they've been, is testament to how poor the sides around them are, which just shows you if Liverpool not put another 3-match winning run together now off the back of this last one, I have no doubt that they will be comfortably ensconced in the top 4 at that point. So that just shows you, and like you say, is it for Liverpool just about concentrating on the old cliche game by game, and that's, I'm sure, is how Jurgen Klopp's going to sell it to us when he speaks to us in his next press conference, because that's what they're going to have to do, is just concentrate on getting as many wins on the board as possible between now and the end of the season. I think they know if they do, not even the sort of form they showed the last couple of seasons, nothing like that. If they just show something like what they've done in those runs towards top 4 in sort of the past couple of seasons ago or whatever it was, I think that's going to be enough. It doesn't have to be miraculous form. It just has to be decent enough, and the teams around them will fall away because they've all got problems and they've all got tough fixtures against each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a key man in terms of Liverpool finding that consistency could be Sadio Manes. Joel, obviously, our next topic is to sort of talk about the form of him and how far off the pace he's been. I mean, this really is the $1 million question, really, or however many million you get from being in the Champions League, a fair bit more than that, I would imagine. But how on earth did Liverpool get the best out of him for these sort of last 7 matches and potentially Champions League games as well? Because he's just looked so far off the usual sort of standards that he set himself.
He has. I think it's probably the worst run of form he's had in his Liverpool career. I think I'd go that far. I know he had a period in the first half of the 2017-18 season after the 5-0 when he gets sent off against Man City, and he goes on a really tough run there. And I think it's the Porto. He scores against Burnley away just at the start of the year, and then he gets the hat-trick in the orange kit against Porto. And then from then on, pretty much for the next 2 seasons thereafter, he's unplayable, sort of elevates himself into one of the best players in the world. And he's just been so far off it this season, but I think that's accelerated sort of since the turn of the year in line with Liverpool's form. The weird thing is he started the season really well. I think it was sort of 4 or 5 goals in the first few fixtures of the season. Obviously gets a 2 against Chelsea away, and he just looked like the same Mane that you've seen in the last 2 years. He's just unplayable. And I don't know whether, I know some people have mentioned that he had COVID, and whether that's a longer lasting effect. We don't kind of quite know the impact that that's had on individual players, or whether it was just a kind of long-term accumulation of fatigue, both physical and mental. Because the thing is, he's not, both for club and country, he's not really had any sustained time off now in quite a few years. It's sort of 3 or 4 years of just non-stop, really high stakes, high intensity football. And perhaps I think he's not the only one of the squad that's kind of taken its toll on this season. But it is so strange watching him compared to the Mane that, even kind of this time a year ago, before the lockdown, when he was Liverpool's the match winner when games were kind of getting tight late on. I always think of the Norwich away game where Liverpool were pretty poor on the day, and I think Mane had a slight injury, and he comes on with 15 minutes to go, scores the winner out of nothing. And he was just doing that so often last season, and now it's almost reached a point, I think, where he's actually actively detrimental to Liverpool's attack, because it just feels like when the ball gets to him, it's not sticking. The closer he gets towards goal, the more erratic his decision making becomes, and I think it's almost got so far in his own head. I think now it's like a vicious cycle, but when he gets into these positions in these moments, he's second guessing himself. He's not playing on instinct, which I think is, when you see the best of him, that's what he does. Is he's not thinking about what he's doing. He's just playing his natural game. And at the moment, it is painful. He's doing stuff like tripping over his own feet, passing to opposition players when it's just a simple ball, and his finishing is so wild. And I almost think he just needs a few games kind of out the side to refresh, and Liverpool will need him obviously in this final run. But I think if you're kind of asking what team you would pick, I know we'll probably go on to the Real Madrid game later. I wouldn't be starting him. I think you'd probably go with Firmino from the start, Jota on the left, Salah on the right, and leave Mane as your substitute off the bench. I don't know what the other guys think on that, but I think that's just where we are now. It's almost gone past the point of trying to play him back into form.
Yeah, we might as well talk about that now, and I'll go to you on this next, Ollie. I mean, in terms of the Real Madrid game and Sadio Mane specifically, we'll talk more about the second leg generally later on. I mean, is there an argument that you start him and you play him back into form, or is that just sort of counterproductive to the point that Joel makes of he just looks absolutely knackered at the moment?
You could do that. I don't really see what the point of that is now. I mean, he's had 5 months to be played into form, and it's just not coming. I'm not sure what banging your head against the wall at this point would do. I think Joel had a piece this week looking at different ways they could maybe kind of ignite some kind of spark from Mane, and the different things you look at, whether it's just taking him out, which they've done now, and he missed a sitter at the weekend, let's just call it what it is, or changing his position, which they've kind of done so far this season, which is he's still playing on the left, but they changed the whole system to just tell him, you just go be a poacher. You just do not be involved in the build-up play. Don't worry about that. Focus on scoring goals. That didn't work. Anything else is now just compromising the whole team. They were so disjointed last week against Madrid, both with the ball and without the ball. The pressing was brutal. You basically had Jota running around. Then Mane, who ends up stealing the ball a bunch, but nothing effective, nothing high up the pitch, and nothing that was coordinated to the rest of the team. A lot of luck and fluke baked into what looked like decent numbers at the end of it. So I just don't think you can roll with that anymore. And I also don't think you can roll with the three. We spoke about this at length last week about having the 3 smaller running behind guys, and you saw the effects against Real Madrid. They're completely disconnected from back to front, and then you see the Villa game with Roberto Firmino back in, and the best combination they have all game other than Trent to Salah is Fabinho firing the ball through the lines of Firmino. So I think at this point, which is, you think about it, Matt, it's kind of wild how recently we went through it's all Firmino. Now it's all that it's Mane. The only guy who's delivered all season is Salah, as well as Jota, I guess, when he's been healthy. I think at this point it picks itself, and you say to Sadio Mane, either you start your summer break early, or in these 15, 20-minute spells you get at the end of games, you're going to have to show us that desire to press the ball is back, and that when you get chances, you can take them, because they now have this player in Diogo Jota where this is what it's going to be for the next 2 years, is we're going to pick the players in the best form. There is no more, you just get straight into the team, which is the culture that Jurgen Klopp will have wanted to have built over time. And it's just so happened that it's come along so fast. And whether it's due to mental exhaustion, 3 years straight playing international football, continental football, and domestic football, whether it's COVID, it's kind of pointless to sit and figure out the reason at this point. It just is what it is. And they're going to have a summer to try and figure it out. And hopefully a couple of those things will have settled down. But right now, Joel's right. It's become an unplayable, untenable situation. Mane is one of the finest players in the world on his day, but he's not fallen from where Salah, who his overall game has not been excellent this year, but he's still doing what he does at the highest possible level, which is put the ball in the net. Mane, when he's not at his free-flowing best with and without the ball, he just doesn't have that same kind of impact, and it does become a drag on the team.
And I suppose, Lynchy, Roberto Firmino got a mention there by Ollie. I thought he was much better against Aston Villa. That sort of helps Jurgen Klopp massively to sort of solve this conundrum, because you can actually afford, now that Jota is back fit, to just take Mane out, put Roberto Firmino in, and see if that's any better.
Yeah, I remember on this podcast before the first leg of Real Madrid, I wasn't even that convinced myself, saying that maybe Mane was the one who should be dropping out and Firmino should come into the side, and then you'd have Salah, of course. And I think, like I say, I wasn't that convinced by it myself, but I think what you saw then in the two following games sort of justify that, is that Liverpool they don't get up the pitch as well when they don't have Firmino in the team. Of all the qualities of the other three forwards, I think stickiness with the ball in the final third is not one of them, really. I think they all prefer to go in behind and be the finisher. So having Firmino in solves that problem. You obviously can't drop Mo Salah because he's still incredible. And I agree with Ollie that his all-round play's maybe not been perfect, but he's just a ruthless finisher, and his goal tally is testament to that this season. And that really leaves you, doesn't it, with then one decision to make, which is, if you're going to go with the front three, then it's got to be Jota or Mane on that left-hand side. And Jota's not only in far better form, but he's the left-hand side is probably the most natural of the three positions to him. So I think it sort of picks itself, really. And Firmino did enough for me against Villa. Very unlucky to get that goal choked off to keep his place. And I think as well, the sort of defensive side of the game will maybe come into Klopp's thinking. I think the way that press was against Real Madrid was such a mess, and that Real Madrid worked it out after very little time in the game, that they could just drop Kroos off into that position and he could have the freedom to play balls in behind. I think Firmino's a little smarter of the three, or of the four, really, in terms of his pressing. Would have maybe accommodated for that a little more and noticed it earlier and sort of closed down that space and pushed up. So I think Jurgen Klopp's going to go down that route for this one. I think it's the obvious pick, really, is to put Firmino back in the middle and then pick Jota over Mane. But it's obviously a tough one given what Mane's done over recent years. But I think if you can't play him back into form, it hasn't happened in recent months. So the obvious option is to try and get him back into some form off the bench. And if Jurgen Klopp does make that call, that's what he'll have to hope can happen.
I suppose it could just be a one-moment thing for Sadio Mane, couldn't it, Joel? If he was to come off the bench and score a decisive goal against Real Madrid, that might be all it takes for him to get back. But I suppose that the worry is that you just don't have the confidence, particularly when you've seen what he did last weekend off the bench. He almost actively made Liverpool worse at times. It just doesn't feel like that's ever likely to come at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not so convinced at this point that a single moment really solves the problem, because he scored kind of occasional goals this year. He obviously gets the one against Spurs away, and then he scores in the second leg against Leipzig, and in the first leg, in fact, against Leipzig. So you're thinking those moments might sort of carry into the league form, but it just hasn't happened. I think the problem, whatever it is with Mane, is a little bit too deep rooted, and I think a full sort of summer to refresh and just reset ahead of next season is probably kind of what he needs, and whatever Liverpool can get out of him, whether that is kind of predominantly using him as an impact sub off the bench for the remainder of the season, then that's fine. But I think if you're looking at the raw numbers, I mean, that tells the whole story. He scored fewer league goals than Jota now, despite having played pretty much every single game this season. Jota's been out for 3 months and still has more than him. I think that kind of says it all, really. And I think that point that both the guys have mentioned there is massive at the moment in terms of the setup of the front three with Firmino in it or not in it, and the difference that makes, because it's kind of become over the last, well, it's not just this season, it's over the last 12 to 18 months, really, a lot of kind of scrutiny on Firmino's goal tally, and I think rightly so. He hasn't been doing enough in that regard, but I think purely from a sort of a structure and how the team sort of builds up attacks point of view, there are certain games and situations within games where I think having Jota, Mane and Salah does work. They obviously won 5-0 against Atalanta earlier this season, and there was a flurry of games recently where that worked really well. But I think in certain situations where you just need to kind of sustain pressure, Firmino is such a good sort of relief valve, really. He holds on to the ball when he's playing well, that is. And I thought the Villa game is probably the sharpest he's looked in that regard for a while. I think while all the talk is kind of often around his output in terms of goals, I think his all-round game this season has dropped off as well in terms of the pressing and the movement and the link-up play. But I think against Villa, maybe sort of having that international break, he'd obviously come back from an injury, didn't go away, didn't have any international games with Brazil or anything. That might have done him a little bit of good coming into these final few games. And yeah, he just looked a lot more like the Firmino you expect. And I think that probably is a setup Liverpool will go with for the majority of games from here on in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a difficult conundrum for Liverpool to solve in terms of Sadio Mane. But Ollie, in terms of another player who's maybe made a couple of errors or maybe not made a couple of saves that you might have expected him to make, Alisson Becker maybe has come under a little bit of scrutiny over the last couple of weeks. I know you've written something on that. Certainly if Sadio Mane is a conundrum for Liverpool, Alisson Becker very much isn't.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because he's certainly made errors. I mean, the third goal against Madrid and the goal at the weekend, he should save both, and you don't need to be any kind of expert to see that. The goalkeepers will usually tell you with their faces after the ball goes in whether they know whether they should have saved them or not, and Alisson's face pretty much said, yeah, I messed both of those up. The weekend one was difficult. It was in that kind of mid area where you want to fully dive it, but you're not sure whether you should do you go with your feet in that split second, you're thinking about which one I should do. It kind of goes beyond you, then you're looking around going, why didn't I just save the thing? So that put him in a bind. But I think with him, what's strange is when you dig into the numbers, and goalkeepers now have some really nerdy advanced metrics that go way beyond, but they are quite fun. He still grades out as being one of the best in the world, and he is, without a doubt, this year he's been asked to play the role of being a shot stopper way more than he ever has done before. And he's shown once again, exactly as he was at Roma, that he is, without doubt, maybe Oblak is better just as a dynamic saves, but the best shot stopper in the world, which is not something you associate with when you think of the sweep-up play, the commanding of the box, all that stuff. It's just he's never really been asked to play that role for Liverpool. And the numbers tell you that, yeah, he's still an elite performer at just keeping the ball out of the net. But there's definitely been the last 3.5 months, and obviously he's had all the personal circumstances, suffered a tragedy that you just cannot try to analyse or shuffle into the discussion in any way. There's been a change in his demeanour and the way everyone interacts with him. That it used to be so commanding, so dominant. It was him, it was Van Dijk, it was Gomez, it was Matip, and there was just an aura about the three of them together that allowed the fullbacks to play the way they do, that allowed Liverpool to be such a suffocating side. And that, to me, has vanished. I'm not sure how you feel, Joel, or you, Dave. That kind of sense within himself, like, I know I'm the best in the world, this is almost too easy, has gone. And I think that's visible. Yet in the numbers, he's still the exact same elite player he's always been. And so it's a strange one because you get kind of uncharacteristic errors that I think jump out way more than all the little stuff he's doing, where everyone's talking wonderfully and glowingly of the Phillips and Kabak partnership. I think we'd be having a really different discussion if Alisson wasn't one of the best goalkeepers in the world. I think they could have shipped a few more, particularly against Leipzig away, which I know they're both in Bucharest, but they could have easily had 2 or 3 go in there. We'd be having a different discussion today about that centre-back partnership. So he's in a funny situation right now with uncharacteristic big errors and yet doing a lot of little things that add up to elite goalkeeper play that we just don't talk about enough.
I think for me, David, Alisson just comes into the category a little bit like maybe Robertson and Trent and 1 or 2 other players for Liverpool, that once you get the full squad back, they're not playing every single week. They're not absolutely exhausted. They're sort of playing, a more consistent brand of football across a period of a few months. Maybe they just do improve next season. And that sounds really simple to say it, but I don't think we can overlook the injuries that Liverpool have had and the sort of knock-on impact of those, even on the goalkeeper.
Yeah, I don't think it's maybe a Mane situation where you're worried that even with, things going back to normal, that, there might not be some recovery there. I think with Alisson, there have been a couple of ricks, haven't there, this season, and the moments where he's been questioned. But, he is, if he's showing up in the numbers, is still world class. And there's been a lot of world class moments from him, even despite him struggling at points this season. I think it's fair to say I'm not too concerned about him yet. I think, he's unlucky with the one against Villa in the sense that I don't quite understand why Ozan Kabak's not getting goal side in that moment. Ollie Watkins should never be getting that shot away, and he wouldn't if Virgil van Dijk and Joe Gomez or Joel Matip are there. Just a bizarre decision from the defender that sort of seems to make Watkins' mind up for him and then gets off a shot and it sort of catches him, and just one of those situations. And again, I think maybe Real Madrid's third one, the one that he thinks, you think he should save. It just doesn't seem like the player even gets the shot off in normal circumstances against Liverpool. You could maybe question whether Alisson should probably be expecting to face a few more shots given what's in front of him. But yeah, it's hard to say which comes first. And I think, like you say, I'm not massively concerned about him yet, because I think in normal circumstances, I fully expect him to be back to his best, because he's seen enough, even in these difficult situations, that he's still doing enough that sort of lifts you off your seat at times, and some great saves and great moments of dominating his box. So I think everything's there. It'll just be a lot easier for him when he's got a better and more settled defensive partnership in front of him.
Yeah, absolutely. Quality doesn't go away in a period of a few weeks, and I suppose Sadio Mane can learn from that as well. But just before we finish, then let's talk about Real Madrid, Joel. How do you think Liverpool go about this? Obviously, 2-0 would do it for them, but you just can't really see them keeping a clean sheet. So is the obvious solution to just go for it? I'm a bit torn, to be honest.
Yeah, it is a weird one. Obviously, the usual factor that you would kind of rely on and play a massive part with the crowd in the second leg just isn't there. So, if anything, given Liverpool's recent record, although obviously the Villa game changes it a little bit, but they've hardly kind of had a great run at form at Anfield for some time now. If anything, it's almost tougher. I think Madrid will sort of relish that challenge. It is difficult to see where they go with it. I think there will be kind of one or two changes in the lineup. I would definitely expect Thiago to be starting this one if he's presuming he's all kind of fit and available, which, given he came off against in the second half against Villa, came off the bench, you would expect he's fine. I think the front three, again, there might be a bit of a rejig there. We've mentioned the Mane discussion, but in terms of general approach, I think that the only thing Liverpool can do is approach it like the Barcelona second leg and try and get the first goal and just go from there, basically. I think if you said to me there'd be 1-0 up on 70, 75 minutes right now, I definitely would take that. I think they've just got to start solid. I don't think they can afford, really, given kind of how fragile the defence has been at times this season, with the goalkeeper not in the best of form. I don't think they really can afford to go into this one gung-ho and just try to outgun Real Madrid, because they'll just get picked apart. I think at the other end, I think they've got to try and stay tight, try and dominate the midfield. They can't be letting Modric and Kroos, as talented as those players are and all they've gone to achieve, they are kind of getting on in terms of age, especially Modric. And the only way they can impact games anywhere near kind of the level that you saw in the first leg is if teams allow them to, by kind of sitting back. And I think that's definitely an argument to get Firmino back in the team, because he will kind of sit in front of them and stop Kroos picking balls over the top. But I think, controlling the midfield more so than it did in the first leg. And I think even if they go into half time and they've not scored 0-0 and they've kept it tight, I think that's not the worst thing. But it's got to be going 1-0 up and just take it from there, really.
Yeah, the midfield selection, Ollie, is the really interesting question. I think we've obviously touched about Sadio Mane, but in terms of the midfield, is there an argument to say maybe someone like James Milner might be needed in there? I mean, you'd assume that Firmino would be an absolute certainty. And then there's the sort of Gini Wijnaldum question. There are a couple of options for Liverpool to go down.
There are, and it's just so bizarre that we're sat here thinking about the options and we're not talking about Naby Keita and Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, which is £100 million worth of players that were supposed to be fulcrums of the second cycle of Jurgen Klopp. We're still saying, okay, well, James Milner brings balance to the midfield and he's 35 years old, soon to be 36, and he's the one who's going to provide the midfield cover in a European Cup quarter-final at that age. It's a real strange one. I really thought the plan last week was in retrospect, I wouldn't say embarrassing is too strong. It's more the carrying out of the plan than necessarily Jurgen Klopp's plan. It made perfect sense. We don't have the guy who will drop in to link the midfield to the forward line, so we'll get the forward line to drive up. We'll get the midfield line, to drive up to the forward line with Naby Keita, and he referenced in the pre-match stuff about his dribbling, and he just could not gain any control of the ball, and they didn't have the tenacity to press at the level they really needed to win back the ball in that midfield area. So the only two things you can try and do is say who is up for pressing really high in that front three, who will put that makeshift back line on the back foot. Obviously, Madrid lost Vasquez during the Clásico, and it looks like he's going to be touch and go and playing. There'll be no Sergio Ramos. So it's going to be another makeshift back four for Madrid, who were outstanding last week, but you're really asking a lot if you're Zidane to say that Nacho plus whoever is going to play there, whether Varane will clear COVID protocols and is available to play, or whether they have to roll with Militao again, we're not sure. But to expect those guys to deliver another game at that level against that front line is asking an awful lot. So for Klopp, he's got to say, we need pace and tenacity in that forward line, and then someone who can control the ball in the midfield sphere. And so whether it's Milner, who is an excellent player at controlling the whole flow of a game, both with and without the ball, whether it's Thiago, who that's his whole mode, or whether it's Wijnaldum, I think it's two of those three. But it's just crazy to me that we're not even discussing in this kind of game where you need some kind of verve and you really want to get on the front foot. There's no talk again of rolling with Keita, who apparently was world class for 2 weeks in training, and so suddenly had to be dropped into the team, and he's nowhere to be seen. And there's no Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. It would feel like a night where you would run driving surging runs from the midfield to really try and bring some oomph to the action, and yet it doesn't make sense when you think about it.
If you're Real Madrid or Zinedine Zidane, David, I mean, how do you go into this one? Are you sort of taking a look at Liverpool's defence and thinking, well, if they can get a couple of away goals, that pretty much ends the contest? Or are you sort of thinking about it in a more defensive sense? I think it's fascinating, not just from a Liverpool perspective, but it's fascinating how they will go about it as well.
Yeah, I think for Zidane, I think he's going to be worried about the composition of the back line that he's going to put together. I think it's going to be fragile, isn't it? And although, Real Madrid were completely dominant against Liverpool in that first leg, I think he will still be a little bit worried about what if, Mohamed Salah's still so dangerous. What if that front three clicks and they get things right in midfield? Because 2-0 is not completely out of Liverpool's reach, is it? That is, it's not really comparable to the Barcelona game in that Liverpool desperately needed an early goal in that one, whereas this one, like Joel says, if you got, even if you go 1-0 up in 70th minute, it gives you way more than enough time to get a second goal, which would be good enough. Then I think from Liverpool's perspective, they've got to just look at it as, that's twice on the bounce now that Real Madrid have sort of completely had their pants down really in midfield and found a way of just dominating the ball and using the best part of their team, which is that midfield axis to just completely keep Liverpool at arm's length. I think for Liverpool, even if they don't go through, I think it would be nice to just see them perform better and sort of push their tactical plans onto Real Madrid a little bit more and sort of have more impact on the game. I'm not entirely sure how they do that. I think whether, like we said earlier, I think Firmino playing and maybe his knowledge of the press and sort of intelligence in terms of where to pick up positions and block off passing lanes, and maybe that can hopefully put Kroos and Modric under a little bit more pressure than last week. And obviously there's some big calls to be made in midfield, but just want to see Liverpool do better than they did. And if Real Madrid are savvy again and they find a way around however Liverpool start the game, I want to see Liverpool react to that as well, because that's something they just didn't do in the last game. And you just want to see them lay a glove on Real Madrid and at least make them panic.
Just before we finish, then I'll go around each of you and sort of ask you to go and tell me what you think is going to happen in the game, how Liverpool generally will approach it, and sort of give us a scoreline prediction as well. So we'll go in the same order. I'll start with you, Joel. How do you think it might pan out?
I think Liverpool will score. I just don't see them being able to keep Real Madrid out enough to go through. So I could see something like a score draw. But yeah, unfortunately, not the victory, but at least the season won't end there. I think that was the worry beforehand, that they would just lose to Madrid. Top four will be done. But whatever happens, they've got something to fight for. But yeah, score a goal, maybe two, but not be able to keep them out the other end.
Yeah, I'm thinking along similar lines. I think it might be a 2-2 draw or something like that. But like you say, the fact that Liverpool have got 7 games to get themselves back into next season's Champions League means that wouldn't, be as bad a result as maybe it would have been a month or so ago. But Ollie, what about you? How do you think it might go? Do you give Liverpool any hope, even though there's no fans inside Anfield?
Yeah, I give hope. I think that backline being makeshift and having that kind of quality in your front three should always give you some form of hope. Correct me if I'm wrong, they've never turned around a 3-1 deficit before, right? I can't remember a 3-1. 3-1's really annoying because you're teased by the away goal, but you don't want to go for it from the off, like you were saying, Dave. And then you get there, it's like, well, let's just get to half time and see where we're at. And all of a sudden, you've only got 45 minutes to chase those two, and you've talked yourself out of the game. Wow, it's really tough. This season has been so difficult that it's not going to end in a pleasant way. So I'm going to say they win. They win 2-1 with throwing everything at it, and it's almost similar to when Chelsea came to Anfield in 2005, and there's the Good Johnson moment. We end up with one of those Good Johnson moments where we all spend the summer thinking about what if. That's what I'll go with.
As long as there's no VAR involved, I think a lot of people would probably be okay with that. David, we'll finish with you. How do you think it might pan out?
Yeah, I think I'm similarly pessimistic just because of the tone of the season. So I think, maybe Liverpool win 2-1 and go out with the sort of glory. That's the glorious way to go out, isn't it? To win the game and concede in the last minute.
Yeah, fingers crossed Liverpool can pull something off, but plenty of pessimism on this week's episode of the Liverpool.com podcast. That's just about all we've got time for, though, this week. Plenty more, of course, to come across Blood Red over the next couple of days as the build-up to Real Madrid continues. We'll have open training to bring you, press conferences galore as well, plus plenty more things before the game kicks off. But from myself, Matt Addison, from Oliver Connolly, from Joel Rabinowitz, and of course from David Lynch, that's all we have time for now. Goodbye.